When Nathan Walker took over Walker Grille, he wasn't just inheriting a restaurant brand, he was stepping into his father's legacy. His dad had started the business with a single diner and a vision to create spaces where both customers and employees felt seen, respected, and valued. Over the years, Walker Grille had grown to 12 locations across the state, known for hearty meals, friendly service, and a community-first attitude. But since his father's passing, things had changed. On paper, profits looked steady, but beneath the numbers, Nathan noticed something troubling. Exit interviews hinted at burnout. Anonymous employee emails painted a picture of stress, low morale, and poor leadership. Customer satisfaction scores were dropping. The brand his father built with care was slowly unraveling, and Nathan needed to know why. At first, he did what most modern CEOs do. He scheduled meetings. He reviewed internal reports. He sat across mahogany conference tables and listened to regional managers spin the same narratives: minor hiccups, staff adjustments, a temporary wave of resignations. But after weeks of sugar-coated answers and vague reassurances, Nathan had had enough. The people feeding him these reports weren't on the floor, dealing with dinner rushes, angry customers, or double shifts. They weren't scrubbing plates or serving meals with forced smiles. They were detached. And Nathan refused to lead from a distance any longer. It was time to get his hands dirty. 3 days later, he stepped into one of the chain's underperforming locations. He wore a faded ball cap, old jeans, and a discount polo shirt. His usually clean-shaven face now carried a few days' stubble, and thick glasses masked his sharp features. No one in this location had ever met him in person. Most employees only knew his name from company emails or the occasional corporate memo. Slipping into a corner booth near the back, Nathan faded into the background. That's how he wanted it. What he saw from that booth told him more than any spreadsheet ever could. The restaurant was running. Yes, but barely. Tables were cluttered with dirty dishes. Customers shifted uncomfortably as they waited too long for refills. The few servers on the floor were clearly overwhelmed, moving from table to table like they were constantly behind. Nathan counted one young waitress running drinks, cleaning up spills, delivering food, and seating new customers, all while trying to keep her composure. Behind the counter, a man in a black button-down and name tag that read Derek leaned against the wall, scrolling his phone. That was the manager. He didn't take notes. He didn't step in. He didn't even seem to notice the chaos unfolding around him. Nathan kept observing. He wasn't there to judge, at least not yet. He wanted to understand. What he saw was a system pushed to its limits. The employees were not the problem they were trying their best with, what little support they had. The real issue was neglect, leadership, or the lack of it, the kind that drains the energy out of good people and drives them to quit. By the time Nathan's meal arrived, cold, delayed, and clearly rushed, he no longer needed anyone to tell him this location was in trouble. He could feel it in the atmosphere. This place didn't need a motivational poster. It needed real change. He sipped his lukewarm coffee and watched the floor, noting every sign of strain. The staff didn't look lazy. They looked tired, worn down, like they were constantly bracing for the next problem instead of being set up for success. And Derek. He finally moved, but only to scold a waitress for missing a drink order. His tone wasn't firm. It was demeaning. Nathan felt his jaw tighten. This wasn't a blip in operations. This was a culture problem, a leadership failure. And it was personal. His father's name was on the front of that building. The people inside deserved better. Nathan finished his coffee, left cash on the table, and walked out the door, but he wasn't leaving for good. That visit was only the beginning. Nathan had seen enough to confirm what he feared: something was broken, and he wasn't about to fix it from a boardroom. The next time he walked through that door, it wouldn't be as a customer. It would be as an employee under a different name, with sleeves rolled up and eyes wide open, because if he was going to rebuild what his father had started, he needed to feel the weight of the problem from the inside and expose the rot that polite reports and filtered meetings could never reveal. Nathan hadn't been sitting long in that corner booth before he noticed her Megan. Auburn hair tied back in a ponytail, black apron dusted with flour near the pockets, and a posture that tried to hide how tired she really was. She moved with practiced urgency, one hand balancing a tray, the other scribbling down orders, her polite smile never quite reaching her eyes. She greeted him with warmth, asked if he needed anything, and jotted his order without missing a beat. Her voice was soft, but clear, kind, but distant. Nathan ordered a basic burger and coffee, but he wasn't here for the food. He was here to watch, and Megan quickly became the center of his focus, not because she stood out, but because she clearly shouldn't have been doing it all alone. He watched her weave through the maze of tables, taking orders from one family, then rushing to clean up after another. The restaurant wasn't overly busy, but the chaos was constant. She was the only server on the floor for most of that lunch hour. No busser, no host, no backup, just Megan. She refilled drinks, bussed tables, dropped checks, and returned change, all without letting the stress crack her professional mask. Nathan noticed how she offered every customer the same exhausted but genuine hospitality, but the cracks were there if you looked close enough. The slight shake in her hand as she poured coffee, the way she winced when a child spilled a full glass of water, the whisper of frustration that escaped when the kitchen mixed up yet another order. And all the while the manager Derek leaned against the service counter like he had all the time in the world. At one point, as Megan rounded the corner toward the drink station, Nathan caught sight of something that made his stomach tighten. She paused behind the soda machine out of view from most customers and turned her back to the room. Her shoulders were rigid, her head tilted down. Then quickly, almost imperceptibly, she wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her shirt. No dramatic sobs, no breakdown, just a quiet, desperate moment. One that revealed more than any words could. Nathan looked away, feeling the sharp weight of guilt and anger. No one should have to cry during their shift, especially not while keeping a restaurant afloat, and certainly not while their manager scrolled through his phone a few feet away. She returned to the floor a moment later, smile pasted back on, as if nothing had happened. But Nathan had seen it, and now he couldn't unsee it. When Megan passed his table again, he gently waved her over. "You look like you're running this whole place by yourself," he said with a casual tone. Her response was a dry laugh. "Feels like it most days." There was no sarcasm, just resignation. He wanted to ask more, but before he could, Derek barked across the restaurant about drinks, delayed at another table. Megan's face hardened for a split second, her jaw tightened. Her eyes flickered, but she nodded and moved without a word. Nathan didn't miss the way her hands trembled just slightly as she picked up a tray. It was more than being overworked. It was being undervalued. For the next hour, Nathan sat in silence, watching her grind through the rest of her shift. Every moment she moved like someone afraid to slow down, afraid that if she paused, everything would collapse. When a customer snapped at her for a late appetizer, she apologized without excuse. When a child spilled ketchup across the booth, she cleaned it without flinching. No one stepped in to help. No one asked if she was okay. The other staff, what few there were, kept their heads down. It wasn't just Megan holding up the restaurant. It was Megan holding up a sinking ship while everyone else pretended it wasn't leaking. When the crowd thinned and the noise died down, Nathan saw a rare moment of stillness. Megan stood near the back, staring at the soda machine like she wasn't sure what to do next. He took that chance. Walking over with his now empty coffee mug in hand, he struck up another brief conversation. "This place always run like this?" he asked gently. Megan let out a breath, half laugh, half sigh. "Honestly, it didn't used to. I used to love this job, but lately it feels like I'm the only one who cares." She didn't need to say more. Nathan understood. She wasn't complaining, she was surviving. And in that moment, he knew two things for certain. Megan was the soul of that restaurant, and the system around her was failing her completely. He left that shift more determined than ever to find out why and to fix it from the inside out. It didn't take long for Nathan to see the mask drop. If Megan had been holding the restaurant together with quiet strength, then Derek, the manager, was the force pulling it apart slowly and with alarming consistency. His presence was a contradiction, visible yet disengaged, loud yet disconnected. Nathan had watched him lean against the wall for over an hour, with his eyes glued to his phone, moving only when a customer raised their voice or when a mistake gave him an excuse to act superior. And when he did move, it wasn't to assist, it was to criticize. That's when it happened. A middle-aged couple at table 4 waved for service, having waited too long for a drink. Refill Megan already, juggling 3 other tables, hadn't reached them yet. Derek saw his opportunity. Megan, he barked across the room, loud enough for the entire dining area to hear. Table 4's been waiting 10 minutes. What are you doing? Taking a break. His words cut through the restaurant like a whip. Heads turned, Megan froze. Mid-step tray balanced on one hand. Her smile dropped, replaced by a rigid expression. She tried to hold steady. "Yes, sir," she muttered, voice barely above a whisper, and turned quickly toward the drink station. Nathan watched her face as she walked by. It was the face of someone who had learned to absorb humiliation like a bruise that never heals. She didn't flinch because this wasn't new. This was routine. Behind the soda machine, a young server, barely out of his teens by the look of him, approached Megan quietly. "You okay?" he asked. Voice low, Megan didn't look up. She kept her focus on the drink pitcher in her hands. "I'm fine," she said flatly. The boy lingered, unsure whether to believe her. "He shouldn't talk to you like that," he added almost apologetically. Megan's fingers tightened around the handle of the pitcher. She exhaled sharply through her nose. "I can't afford to lose this job," she whispered. "It's just how he is." The boy nodded and walked away. His own shoulders slumped as if he was carrying something invisible too. Nathan sat back, hands wrapped tightly around his coffee mug. He'd been a leader long enough to know when something had gone beyond bad management. This wasn't just stress, this was fear, and that fear had roots. It wasn't just Megan. Every employee in that building moved like they were walking through fog laced with tension. No one joked, no one paused. The kitchen crew barely spoke. Derek didn't yell often, but when he did, it was cutting and public. When he didn't yell, he lingered like a storm cloud waiting to rain. He never offered to help or coach. He didn't build a team. He commanded a staff, a fragile, stretched-thin, tired staff, working not out of pride but survival. That's what Nathan saw in every movement, the careful caution, the suppressed frustration, the effort to avoid drawing attention. It was a restaurant held together not by leadership, but by fear of punishment. Nathan had once read that good leadership multiplies effort, but bad leadership multiplies damage. Derek was the embodiment of that truth. The numbers Nathan had seen in reports, the turnover rate, the customer complaints, the increase in errors suddenly made perfect sense. The environment wasn't just unhealthy, it was designed to break people down. The strong either left or burned out, and the rest stayed silent. Megan wasn't the only one carrying more than her share. She was just the one who refused to crack in public. But even she had her limits, and Nathan had seen the signs, the red eyes, the swallowed emotions, the fatigue hidden under forced professionalism. As the shift dragged on, Nathan remained in the background, his role still unrecognized, but his mind was racing. Every system he thought was working had failed these people. The values his father built the company on, respect, empathy, empowerment, had been twisted into rules, schedules, and quotas. And in the wrong hands, like Derek's, those systems became weapons. The problem wasn't just that Derek was toxic, it was that no one had stopped him. The reporting systems, the regional oversight, the HR check-ins, they had all missed it, or worse, ignored it. By the time Nathan stood to leave that night, Megan was still clearing tables, shoulders, tense, eyes hollow. Derek stood near the register, counting receipts, completely unaware or uncaring about the damage he left in his wake. Nathan didn't say a word. Not yet. This wasn't the moment to expose who he was. He needed more than emotions. He needed evidence. He needed to get inside deeper to see how far this rot had spread. But one thing was already crystal clear. This store didn't suffer from inefficiency. It suffered from a culture of fear, and that fear had a name. Derek Nathan returned the next morning with a new name, a forged backstory, and work boots he hadn't worn in years. The transformation was simple but deliberate. A hoodie replaced the button-down, a 5-day beard added a layer of grit, and his application listed him as Matt Davis, an out-of-work line cook looking for a paycheck. The process wasn't just easy, it was alarming. He filled out a 1-page form in under 10 minutes, and no one asked a single follow-up question. No reference checks, no background verification. Just a, "Can you start today?" and a uniform tossed his way. They were desperate for bodies, not people. And in that moment, Nathan Walker, the CEO of Walker Grille, was no longer the man in charge. He was just another warm body in a broken system. His assignment: the dish pit, a stainless steel dungeon tucked in the back of the kitchen reeking of grease steam and old fryer oil. Trays stacked higher than the pass window, half-eaten meals mixed with sticky soda cups, and a floor that never dried. It wasn't glamorous, but that was the point. If he was going to understand the true state of his restaurant, he had to start at the bottom. The moment he clocked in, the stress hit like a wave. Orders were already behind, the grill line was understaffed, and the air was thick with frustration. The cooks barked shorthand across burners, while the servers rushed in and out like panicked messengers. No one smiled, no one joked. There was no camaraderie, just noise, tension, and urgency. Nathan worked silently, absorbing every moment. Derek's voice boomed from the front of the house like a drill sergeant. "That plate better not come back cold again," he shouted at a server. "Table 7 is still waiting. What are you doing back here?" His presence wasn't one of leadership. It was of surveillance. Blame was his default setting. When something went wrong, he didn't ask what happened. He found someone to yell at. Nathan had led people before. He knew the difference between pressure and punishment. What Derek did wasn't pushing for excellence. It was pushing people toward the edge. Every time a mistake happened, the entire staff tensed, as if bracing for a storm. By noon, Nathan's arms ached from lifting heavy trays, and sweat clung to his back. It had been years since he'd worked a shift this physically demanding, but he didn't complain. He was there to listen to, feel to witness. When the rush finally slowed, he spotted Megan sitting near the back exit phone, in hand, a paper cup of water untouched beside her. Her shoulders were slouched, her eyes distant. He approached casually, sitting on a crate nearby, pretending to check his own phone. "First day?" she asked, not looking up. "Yeah," he replied, keeping his voice light. She offered a half smile. "Welcome to the chaos." They sat in silence for a moment, and then, as if releasing a valve, Megan began to speak. She didn't pour out her heart, but the edges of the truth slipped through her words. "It used to be different. You know," she said, voice quiet. "There was stress. Yeah, but people cared. We helped each other out. Now it's like survival mode every shift." Nathan stayed quiet, letting her continue. Since Derek took over, she added, "Everything's changed. People don't quit because of the job. They quit because of him." She looked down, rubbing her temples. "He doesn't manage. He breaks people. Makes them feel like it's their fault when things go wrong, and if you push back even just once, he'll make your life miserable." Nathan listened, the words burning into his memory. It was the confirmation he didn't want, but needed. Megan's story wasn't just an isolated complaint. It was a summary of everything he'd seen with his own eyes. This wasn't a performance issue. It wasn't about training or hours or wages. It was about leadership, or rather, the lack of it. Derek had created an environment where fear replaced communication, where exhaustion was mistaken for laziness, and where the good employees either disappeared or became shells of themselves. Just to get through the day, Nathan nodded slowly, committing every detail to mind. Megan stood forcing a practiced smile. Anyway, time to dive back in. And just like that, she disappeared into the noise again. Another soldier in a quiet war. As she walked away, Nathan leaned against the wall, heart heavy, Everything he had feared was true. The reports hadn't lied, they'd just left out the human cost. Numbers on a spreadsheet couldn't show the quiet tears, the clenched fists, the empty stares. But he had seen them now, felt them, carried dishes beside them, listened to them speak, even if just in whispers. And as the sound of clattering plates and rushed footsteps filled the air once more, Nathan knew something with absolute certainty. He couldn't just fire a bad manager and call it a day. He had to root out the rot from the inside, completely. By his second full day behind the kitchen doors, Nathan no longer had to guess what was happening. He could feel it in his bones. The rhythm of Walker Grille had changed. It didn't pulse with the fast-paced energy of a busy restaurant. It moved with the anxious tension of a place barely held together by thread. The staff clocked in heads low and mouths shut, as if entering a war zone instead of a workspace. Every conversation was clipped, every gesture efficient but strained. There were no jokes shared over prep tables, no laughter between orders. It wasn't that these people didn't care, it was that they couldn't afford to care, not in an environment where mistakes were met with reprimand and silence was the only safety. Nathan stood at the dish pit, the steam from industrial sinks clouding his glasses as he watched the ecosystem unravel. He saw a server flinch when her hand brushed a sauce tray off a ledge and it clattered to the floor. She didn't curse or sigh. She immediately dropped to her knees to clean it up, eyes darting toward the front like a child expecting to be scolded. When she stood up, she mouthed, "Sorry," to no one in particular, and rushed away. Nathan didn't have to ask what she was afraid of. He already knew Derek had trained them this way. Not through skill or encouragement or support, but through fear. And that kind of training doesn't produce loyal employees. It produces survivors. The moment that cemented Nathan's realization came just after the lunch rush. The kitchen was hot, loud, and 2 cooks down. A line cook mid-40s, seasoned with creases of exhaustion etched into his brow, was grilling burgers while calling out modifiers over the sizzle of meat. When the 3rd ticket in a row came back wrong due to a customer's last-minute change, the cook let out a muffled grumble under his breath. It wasn't even loud, just a muttered complaint, the kind of harmless frustration every kitchen worker knows well. But Derek, standing just beyond the prep line, heard it, and like a vulture catching a twitch, he swooped in. "What was that?" Randy Derrick snapped, stepping in with arms crossed. The room quieted. The only sound was the hiss of the flat top and the muffled clink of utensils. Randy didn't look up. "Nothing," he muttered. "Didn't sound like nothing." Derek pushed, stepping closer. "You got something to say. Say it." The room held its breath. Randy's hands stayed moving, flipping, plating, wiping, but his jaw clenched tight. "I said nothing," he repeated. Derek lingered, gaze sharp. "That's what I thought." Then he walked away, leaving the air heavy in his wake. No one spoke. No one looked at Randy, but Nathan saw it, the way his shoulders sank, the breath he didn't release until Derek was gone. It wasn't the words that hurt. It was the humiliation of knowing everyone had witnessed his silence. Nathan leaned against the wall by the sink, gripping the edge of the metal table until his knuckles went white. This was the culture Derek had created, a place where fear kept everyone in line, where dignity was optional and respect was conditional. People didn't speak because they had learned the cost. One mistake. Shame one word. Trouble. Nathan thought of Megan, of her quiet tears behind the soda machine, and now Randy cornered for a harmless mutter. Different roles, same treatment. He wasn't just seeing a staffing issue, he was seeing a leadership epidemic. And the worst part, this wasn't happening because of one bad day. It was systemic. It had been normalized. Derek wasn't hiding his behavior. He was thriving in it. He'd built a hierarchy where power came from intimidation, not inspiration, where employees measured their value by how well they could endure, not how well they performed. Nathan understood now why so many good people had left and why the ones who stayed looked hollowed out. This wasn't just a failing restaurant. It was a place drained of spirit, stripped of its humanity, and left to operate on fumes. By the time his shift ended, Nathan didn't feel tired. He felt haunted. The numbers on the spreadsheets, the turnover rates, the customer reviews. They weren't just trends. They were symptoms, and the disease ran deep. It wasn't about food quality or scheduling errors. It was about broken trust, about fear replacing communication, about leaders like Derek turning job security into emotional captivity. As he walked out that night, his clothes damp from steam and sweat, Nathan knew he couldn't just fix the system. He had to rebuild it from the ground up, and it would start with telling the truth, even if it shook the walls. The next morning, the familiar scent of coffee and fryer oil filled the air, but something was different. This time, Nathan didn't walk through the back door in worn-out sneakers and a borrowed apron. He entered through the front, dressed in a crisp navy suit, polished shoes clicking against the tiled floor, and posture straight with purpose. The staff barely noticed him at first. They were busy setting up for the breakfast rush. But when Derek glanced up from the counter and locked eyes with him, everything changed. Confusion flickered across the manager's face, followed by a slow realization. The glasses were gone. The scruff was trimmed. The disguise was no more. Nathan Walker, the man behind Walker Grille, was no longer undercover. Without waiting for an invitation, Nathan walked straight to the center of the dining room, his voice cutting through the morning hum like a bell. "Everyone, stop what you're doing." Plates clattered. Conversations ceased. The room fell still. Customers paused mid-bite. Cooks leaned out from the kitchen. Servers froze in place. Nathan turned to face the staff, and more specifically Derek, his voice calm but firm. "My name is Nathan Walker. I'm the CEO of Walker Grille, and for the last 2 days I've been working here undercover." The silence deepened, jaws slackened. Derek's expression went pale, shifting from disbelief to dread. Nathan continued, "I've seen the way this store is run, and I'm here to talk about it. Right now, with everyone listening." Derek stepped forward, trying to recover control. "Sir, if you needed to inspect the store, we could have scheduled a formal visit." He offered, his tone coated in corporate polish, but Nathan shut it down. "I've had plenty of formal visits," he replied sharply. "I've sat through meetings filled with excuses. What I needed was the truth, and I found it here." He turned to the team. "I saw servers covering twice the tables. I saw cooks working through exhaustion. And I saw a manager who doesn't lead, but controls, belittles, and breaks the people around him." Murmurs rippled through the room. Derek's arms folded tighter, but his confidence was unraveling with every word. Then something powerful happened. Megan, standing by the drink station, stepped forward. Her voice was clear, steady. "He's right," she said, locking eyes with Derek. "You talk down to us. You treat us like we're replaceable. That's why no one stays." She looked around the room. "That's why we're always short-staffed. People don't leave because of the job, they leave because of you." Another voice joined hers. Randy, the line cook from the day before, nodded. "I've been here 5 years. It was never like this until you took over." More staff murmured in agreement, quiet truths finally spoken aloud one after another. In that moment, fear gave way to courage. Nathan gave them space to speak, then turned back to Derek. "I built this company on respect, on trust. And what you've done here goes against everything my father and I ever believed in." Derek's voice cracked as he tried to protest. "With all due respect, I was only enforcing standards," but Nathan cut him off with finality. "You weren't enforcing standards, you were enforcing fear, and that ends today." He turned to the shift supervisor. "Call HR process his termination immediately." Derek stared at him, stunned, then looked at the staff he once ruled with intimidation. No one defended him. No one said a word. He grabbed his things in silence and left. Through the same front doors Nathan had entered. The moment he was gone, the room felt lighter, not celebratory, but undeniably different. Relief. Megan's shoulders dropped for the first time in days. Nathan turned back to the staff. "This store will change starting now. We'll bring in new support. We'll rebuild management. And this will be a place where people want to work, not where they're afraid to come in." He didn't promise overnight miracles, but he made something even more powerful. He made it real. As the staff slowly returned to their tasks, the mood had shifted. They didn't look over their shoulders anymore. And as Nathan nodded to Megan and stepped toward the back office, he knew the real work had just begun, but for the first time it was starting from truth. The atmosphere inside Walker Grille felt changed, but not yet healed. After Derek's public dismissal, the staff moved like people waking from a long, uneasy sleep. They weren't celebrating. They were recalibrating. Nathan knew this was only the beginning. Removing a toxic leader was necessary, but not enough. The systems that allowed him to thrive in the first place had to be addressed, and more importantly, trust had to be rebuilt, brick by brick, standing in the kitchen doorway where the whole team could hear him. Nathan made it official. Derek's termination is effective immediately. He began, voice clear and steady. We'll be hiring additional staff this week to relieve the pressure you've all been carrying alone, and from this moment forward, your safety, your dignity, and your voices matter. He didn't speak like a CEO reading off a clipboard. He spoke like someone who had carried dishes, burned his hands, and felt the same exhaustion they had. Leadership, he said, isn't about commanding from a distance. It's about stepping in, listening, adjusting. There were no corporate buzzwords, no vague timelines. He laid out a plan. Corporate would review staffing levels at every location. Managers would be retrained or replaced, and each team would be assigned a liaison from headquarters who would check in weekly, not through filtered reports, but through face-to-face conversation. He also announced that a new policy had been written that very morning. Employees could report mistreatment directly to a third-party channel with guaranteed confidentiality. You'll never have to suffer in silence again, he promised. And for the first time, a few heads nodded. Later that afternoon, when the restaurant had quieted between shifts, Megan found Nathan near the back hallway. She looked more composed, but still cautious, like someone learning how to relax again. "Got a minute?" she asked. Nathan nodded and gestured for her to join him at the break table. They sat quietly for a moment. Then she said, "I appreciate what you did today. I really do. But if you want this to stick, we don't just need better management. We need a different kind of management." Nathan looked at her, listening closely. "Go on." Megan hesitated, searching for the right words. "We need people who work with us, who get in the weeds when things get tough. Not people who hide in the office or bark orders from the sidelines." She glanced down at her hands. "It's not just about hiring more people. It's about hiring the right people. People who remember what it's like to be on the floor." Her voice was steady, but there was a quiet urgency beneath it. Nathan didn't interrupt. He simply nodded. "Thank you," he said. "That's exactly what I needed to hear," and he meant it. Her insight confirmed what he already suspected. Culture wasn't something you told people to follow. It was something you demonstrated every day. As she stood to return to her duties, he added, "You ever consider stepping into leadership yourself?" Megan gave a tired laugh, one step at a time, but the look she gave him said she hadn't dismissed the idea completely. That evening, Nathan sent an email to the entire corporate team outlining the changes being piloted at the location. At the center of the message was a new initiative, an anonymous feedback system available to every employee, accessible from their phones or any store tablet, where they could report issues, ideas, or praise without fear of retaliation. Each submission would be reviewed weekly by a task force outside of local management. There would also be monthly pulse checks, short surveys to gauge morale and flag early signs of dysfunction. "We can't wait for people to break before we listen." Nathan wrote, "We have to listen early and often." Word of the reforms spread quickly. Regional managers responded with cautious optimism, some with skepticism. But Nathan didn't need unanimous buy-in right away. He needed momentum. The employees who had spent months, some even years, under oppressive conditions were starting to speak again. They weren't cheerful yet, but they weren't quiet anymore either. Nathan knew trust wasn't built in a day, and certainly not through one big announcement. It had to be earned through action, consistency, and presence. So instead of returning to his office the next morning, he showed up again at the restaurant. Not to check in, but to help on the floor, to bus tables, to wipe counters, to show, not just say that things had changed. And as the sun dipped behind the city skyline, the hum of the restaurant began to sound a little different. Not because the problems had vanished, they hadn't, but because for the first time in a long time, someone at the top had looked the team in the eyes and said, "You matter, I'm here." That simple shift from silence to voice, from fear to action, was the beginning of something new. And Nathan Walker wasn't just fixing a restaurant anymore. He was rebuilding a promise. Just days after removing Derek and launching reforms at the restaurant, Nathan stepped into the glass-paneled conference room at Walker Grille's corporate headquarters, determined to carry the change far beyond one location. The skyline stretched behind him, a reminder of how large the company had grown, but size meant nothing without soul. He stood at the head of the long mahogany table where 15 regional managers sat their faces, a mix of curiosity, defensiveness, and quiet dread. These weren't strangers to boardroom conversations, but today wasn't about profits or expansion plans. Today was about reckoning. This isn't a regular check-in. Nathan began setting down a thick folder. It's an emergency meeting because our culture, the one we claim to stand for, has been compromised, and it didn't happen overnight. The room shifted. Some leaned forward, others looked down. Nathan didn't sugarcoat it. He laid out everything he had seen during his 2 days undercover. The toxic leadership, the fear-based compliance, the emotional exhaustion that had replaced what used to be pride. He talked about Megan's resilience, Randy's silence, the broken systems that allowed Derek's behavior to go unchecked for months, possibly years. Then he paused, opened the folder, and slid copies across the table. Inside were data breakdowns, cross-referencing financial performance turnover rates and internal complaints by location. The stores with the lowest morale, he said, also have the highest staff turnover, the worst customer ratings, and the steepest profit drops. That's not a coincidence, that's a culture collapse. Silence lingered before one manager finally spoke. "We thought the complaints were typical stress," he admitted. "Busy kitchens, tough hours. We didn't realize it had gotten that bad." Another manager added, "Some of those emails we assumed they were exaggerated. We didn't follow up, Nathan." Nodded not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. That's exactly why I went undercover. Because when problems get filtered through layers of management, what reaches us isn't the truth. It's the version someone thinks we want to hear. He paced slowly, letting his words settle. And that has to change. Today. Then came the policy shift, clear, decisive, and irreversible. Every manager from district leads to store supervisors would now undergo mandatory leadership reviews every 6 months. These wouldn't be based on sales numbers alone. They would include anonymous employee feedback, turnover analysis, and surprise in-store audits. Any red flags would trigger additional oversight. Managers found fostering hostile environments would face suspension or dismissal, no matter how long they'd been with the company or how well their stores performed financially. "We will no longer reward results at the expense of people," Nathan said firmly. "We will reward the kind of leadership that uplifts, listens, and builds loyalty." He wasn't finished. In addition to leadership evaluations, Walker Grille would begin a company-wide operational audit. Each region would be reviewed by a neutral team of evaluators, not local managers, but outside observers trained to assess both structure and culture. These teams would measure everything from scheduling fairness to kitchen workflow to the tone set by supervisors on the floor. They would interview line cooks, hosts, servers, and dishwashers. "No more assumptions, no more excuses," Nathan said. "We're going to build something sustainable, not just on paper, but in the lives of the people who show up every day to make this company run." The mood in the room was sobering. For some managers, it was a wake-up call. For others, a moment of reflection. But for all of them, it was a turning point. The truth was out, and while uncomfortable, it was also liberating. One by one, heads began to nod. Not in resignation, but in agreement. "We've focused so much on metrics," one regional lead admitted quietly, "that we forgot the people behind the numbers. Nathan let out a breath, not in relief, but in readiness. Then, let's fix it, he said. Let's make sure that what happened in one store never happens again. Not anywhere, not ever. The meeting didn't end with applause, it ended with resolve. A company can survive a bad quarter, but to recover its soul, it takes courage. And now, finally, they had it. Weeks after the emergency reforms were rolled out, Nathan found himself back on the road, not to scout locations for expansion, but to inspect the soul of the company his father once built. He visited stores from suburban malls to downtown blocks, wearing no disguise this time, but carrying the same quiet curiosity that had driven him undercover weeks before. Some locations were thriving, managers had embraced the new policies, trust was being rebuilt, and teams moved with a newfound sense of unity, but not everywhere. At several restaurants, he saw something more troubling. A lingering resistance not from the staff, but from leadership that hadn't changed its mindset. These were places where compliance had replaced connection, where managers followed the rules but hadn't understood the reason behind them. In one store, Nathan watched as a supervisor coldly corrected a server for missing a side order. Technically correct, but tone-deaf and dismissive. The server apologized, but her eyes flickered with that same guarded exhaustion he'd seen in Megan weeks ago. In another location, a kitchen manager stood back during the lunch rush, giving orders but offering no help. Nathan pulled aside a shift lead and asked how things had been since the reforms. "We have the new reporting channels." "Yeah," the employee replied cautiously. "But the culture. It still feels top-down." That phrase stuck with him. Policies alone couldn't fix a company. People had to change, mindsets had to shift. That's when Nathan knew the next step wasn't oversight, it was transformation. Returning to headquarters, Nathan gathered his executive team and laid out a new vision, the launch of a leadership immersion program. Every current and future manager at Walker Grille would be required to spend a full week working every frontline position, not just shadowing, but actively doing the work. They would wash dishes, serve tables, prep food, manage the cash register, clean bathrooms, no exceptions. "If you can't lead with empathy," Nathan said, "you can't lead here." The room was quiet, not because they disagreed, but because they knew what it meant. It wasn't about humbling people. It was about building understanding. And with understanding came better leadership grounded in lived experience. He also proposed a series of monthly learning labs where managers and team members could come together to share ideas and frustrations in a safe, moderated environment. These weren't designed as complaint boxes, but as collaboration hubs. Teams would brainstorm solutions to everyday issues from miscommunication during shifts to improving prep station flow. Regional directors would attend not to supervise, but to listen. Nathan believed strongly that innovation was bottom-up, not top-down. The ones closest to the work often had the best solutions if only someone took the time to ask. As the program rolled out, change didn't happen overnight, but it began to take root. Megan, who had initially hesitated at the idea of moving into leadership, was among the first to join the pilot group. She spent 2 weeks learning cross-functional skills and shadowing seasoned mentors from other branches that had made the cultural shift. At the end of her training, she was offered the role of assistant manager, this time not just as a title, but as a torchbearer for the new values. When Nathan returned to her location and saw her confidently coaching a new hire with patience and clarity, he felt something shift inside him. This wasn't just recovery, it was renewal. Nathan stood once again in the same conference room where weeks earlier he had faced down hard truths. This time he wasn't confronting crisis. He was unveiling a blueprint for resilience. Fixing a company, he told his leadership team, isn't just about removing the bad, it's about building better leadership from the ground up. That means we don't just react to problems, we prepare people to prevent them. We don't wait for pain to make us act, we make care and awareness our standard. As he spoke, he could feel a different energy in the room, not just agreement, but alignment. The company wasn't fully healed yet, but it was finally on solid ground, and that ground was no longer built on fear or tradition. It was built on people, real ones, finally seen, finally heard, and now finally empowered. If this story moved you, we invite you to stay connected with Deep Inside HQ, where real stories spark real change. Every week, we share powerful narratives that uncover what truly happens behind the scenes of everyday workplaces, lives, and leadership. Subscribe to the channel so you never miss a moment of honesty, courage, or transformation. And if this episode resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and drop your thoughts in the comments we read. Everyone together. We're building a community where empathy, accountability, and action matter.